Commander Thaddeus Mercer's hands trembled as he watched his grandchildren snicker at his worn leather scrapbook, their eyes rolling when he mentioned Pearl Harbor. Then Lily found the bloodstained letter from M tucked between pages of combat photographs, and the room fell silent as she read aloud words of desperate love written from behind enemy lines. What shocking truth about their grandfather's past will these letters reveal that could change everything they thought they knew about the quiet hero who raised them? Like and subscribe for more heart-stopping family revelations, and share your own stories of unexpected discoveries in the comments below. The summer storm had knocked out power across 3 counties, rendering the Wi-Fi useless and phone batteries critically low. Katie, Mason, and Zoe sat sprawled across their grandfather's living room furniture, expressions of teenage agony etched on their faces. How much longer? Zoe whined, her 13-year-old patience already exhausted after 40 minutes without connectivity. Could be hours, Thad replied, lighting another oil lamp. Back in my day, we called this normal. Mason groaned dramatically. What did people even do before phones? Talked to each other, Thad said, the edge in his voice sharper than he intended. Remembered things worth remembering. The awkward silence that followed was broken only by the steady drumming of rain against the windows. Thad had been dreading this annual visit since Eleanor passed 3 years ago. These obligations felt increasingly burdensome. 3 teenagers who viewed him as some ancient relic, an inconvenient responsibility for 2 weeks each summer. Well, Katie finally said, pushing herself up from the couch, I'm going to explore. The attic has some old board games, Thad offered, though he doubted Monopoly would compete with whatever digital entertainments they were accustomed to. To his surprise, all 3 trudged upstairs. He could hear their footsteps overhead, the creak of the pulled-down attic stairs, then muffled voices and occasional laughter. At least they weren't complaining anymore. An hour later, they descended with a thick, leather-bound book. Grandpa, what's this? Katie held up his old scrapbook, dust motes dancing in the lamplight around it. Thad's heart quickened. Just old memories, nothing you'd find interesting. Mason had already flipped it open. Whoa, actual printed photographs, like on paper. His tone carried the anthropological fascination of discovering primitive tools. Look how yellow they are, Zoe giggled, and so small. How did people even see anything? We had better eyesight back then, Thad muttered, from not staring at screens all day. This is like ancient technology, Mason continued, oblivious to his grandfather's darkening expression. Did you have to take these to a store to get them? Made real. They were always real, Thad snapped, pushing himself up from his armchair. Those memories were more real than anything you'll ever save in your cloud. The hurt silence that followed made him regret his outburst immediately. They were just kids, after all. But something about their casual dismissal of his most precious possessions cut deeper than they could know. I need some air, he said, grabbing his cane and making his way to the porch, leaving them in the lamplit room with his past spread open between them. Through the window, he could hear their continued commentary, more subdued now. Then suddenly complete silence. He turned back toward the house just as Katie's voice called out, trembling slightly, Grandpa, who's M? Thad stood frozen in the doorway, watching Katie hold a yellowed envelope between her fingers. The stain across its corner rusty, brown against the cream paper, made his stomach clench. He'd forgotten how the blood looked after all these years. Where did you find that? His voice sounded distant, even to himself. It fell out from between these pages, Katie explained, pointing. 2 photographs of young soldiers standing beside a tank. It was tucked in the binding. Mason leaned closer. Is that ... blood? Thad said nothing, his eyes fixed on the letter that he'd hidden away decades ago, even from Eleanor. Can I read it? Katie asked, her earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. Something about the storm's isolation, the flickering lamplight, and the unexpected confrontation with his past made Thad nod slowly. Perhaps it was time. They were old enough to understand complicated truths. Maybe. Katie carefully unfolded the brittle paper, clearing her throat as she began to read. My dearest T, they are searching the village again. I've hidden your uniform, where they won't find it, but we cannot risk meeting until the patrols move north. Marcel suspects an informant among the new refugees. Trust no one. Last night, watching you sleep, I realized with terrible clarity that I have never known such fear, not for myself, but for you. What began as duty has become something I cannot name without trembling. If they discover an American officer here, they will show no mercy. The farmer's wife says I am a fool. Perhaps I am, but in this darkness, what else remains but to hold onto the light we found, however brief its flame, until the second oak, as we planned. Burn this letter. With all that I am. The room remained silent when Katie finished. Even Zoe, usually fidgeting, sat perfectly still, eyes wide. You, obviously, didn't burn it, Mason finally said. Dot shook his head slowly. No, I couldn't. Who was she? Katie asked softly. Madeline, Thad said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years of careful silence. Madeline Rousseau. You were in France during the war. Mason's voice held a new respect. Behind enemy lines, yes, for almost 7 months. In 1944, Zoe scooted forward. Was she your girlfriend before Grandma? Thad lowered himself carefully into his armchair, suddenly feeling every one of his 97 years. It's complicated, Zoe. Very complicated. Were there more letters? Katie asked, gently returning the first to its envelope. Thad nodded. 7. Each one marks a chapter of a story I've never told anyone. Not completely, not even Grandma Eleanor. Mason looked shocked. Eleanor knew some of it. Not all. Some. Burdens you don't share, even with those you love most. Will you tell us? Katie's question hung in the air. Thunder cracked overhead, and the old house creaked around them. Thad studied their faces in the lamplight, no longer bored, no longer distant. For the first time in years, they were looking at him as a person with a past, not just as an obligation. I will, he finally said, but not all at once. Some stories must be earned. I was 24 when we hit Omaha Beach. Thad began the next morning. The power remained out, but morning light streamed through the windows. His grandchildren sat attentively around the kitchen table, the scrapbook open between them. We've seen movies about D-Day, Mason offered. Thad shook his head. No movie captures the sound, the smell, the way the sea turned red. He tapped a photograph of young men in a landing craft. That's my unit. Only 4 of us in this picture survived the beach. Katie studied his young face in the photograph. You look so different. War ages you, Thad said simply. By the time I met Madeline, I felt ancient. He turned the page to a map with penciled markings. Our unit was to push inland, secure this crossroads, but artillery separated us during the advance. 3 of Usme, Private Jackson, and Lieutenant Cooper got cut off behind a German counterattack. The grandchildren leaned closer as Thad traced their desperate retreat on the map. Cooper was hit bad, bled out in a drainage ditch, while Jackson and I watched, helpless. Germans were everywhere. We moved only at night for 4 days, trying to get back to Allied lines. Were you scared? Zoe asked softly. Terrified, Thad admitted. But fear keeps you sharp. 5th night, Jackson stepped on a mine. The blast knocked me unconscious. He paused, the memory still vivid after decades. I woke up in a barn, thought I had been captured. Instead, I found myself staring at the most determined woman I'd ever seen, pointing my own sidearm at me. Madeline, Katie whispered. Thad nodded. She'd dragged me nearly a mile to that abandoned farmhouse, risking her life for a stranger. Why would she do that? Mason asked. The resistance had been waiting for Allied forces. She thought I might have information, orders, anything to help their efforts. Thad smiled faintly. She was disappointed to find I was just a lost lieutenant with a concussion. He described the farmhouse, the broken windows, the sparse furniture, the hidden cellar, where she concealed him when German patrols passed. She was 22, had been fighting the occupation since her parents were executed 2 years earlier. Her brother was in a labor camp in Germany. She had this quiet ferocity about her, nothing dramatic like in movies, just absolute, unbending resolve. Was she beautiful? Zoe asked, always the romantic. Not in conventional ways, Thad answered truthfully. But her eyes, they held something I can't describe. Intelligence, defiance, sorrow, at once. He explained how Madeline connected him with the local resistance network. After determining he could be trusted, they needed someone with military training. I needed to get back to Allied forces. But as the weeks passed, you fell in love with her, Katie finished softly. Thad looked at her sharply. It wasn't that simple. Nothing in war is simple. But the letter, Mason began. That came later, Thad interrupted. First, we were just two people trying to survive. Two people from different worlds, thrown together by circumstances neither of us wanted. He closed the scrapbook, suddenly tired. That's enough for today. But what happened next? Zoe protested. Thad stood carefully, reaching for his cane. Tomorrow, stories need time to breathe. As he walked toward his bedroom for a nap, he heard Mason whisper to his sisters. Did you notice? He didn't look at his phone once the whole time. The power returned that afternoon. But to Thad's surprise, none of his grandchildren rushed to charge their devices. Instead, they spent the day helping him in the garden, asking occasional questions about the war, clearly waiting for the next installment of his story. After dinner, Katie placed the scrapbook on the coffee table. You said the letters need to be earned. What do we need to do? Thad considered her question. Bring me that box from the hall closet. Top shelf. When Mason returned with the dusty cardboard box, Thad removed a small wooden case. Inside lay his medals, insignia, and a folded American flag. These mean something, he said, letting them examine the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. Not because they're made of metal, but because of what they represent. Sacrifice, duty, memory. He watched understanding dawn on their faces. The second letter, he continued, came after I joined Madeline's network. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was helping with sabotage operations. Katie looked shocked. You were in the French resistance. Temporarily, they needed someone who understood explosives, military tactics. Thad carefully extracted the second letter from deeper in the scrapbook. I was assigned to work directly with Madeline. We posed as a farmer and his wife. Wait, Mason interrupted. You pretended to be married. It was safer than explaining why a young woman and man lived in the same house otherwise. Thad handed the letter to Katie. This was her warning about an unexpected German patrol. Katie unfolded it carefully. T. Change of plans. Wolf pack in. The sheep-field arrived without warning. 12 soldiers, 2 officers. They've requisitioned the north barn and will remain through Thursday. The package delivery must be delayed. I've signaled the others. The fields have eyes. Be the simple man I met at market when you return. Say nothing of your time away or trading with your cousin in Beaumont. I've hidden everything beneath the floorboards under my bed. The dog is with Marcel. Exercise caution, my farmer husband. Your accent still needs work. M. Wolfpack meant German soldiers. Thad explained. The package was explosives we were planning to use on a railway bridge, and the dog was a radio transmitter. This is like a spy movie, Zoe whispered. It was terrifyingly real, Thad corrected. Being discovered meant torture, then execution for both of us. He described the network's structure, how Madeline coordinated information between scattered resistance cells, each knowing only their immediate contacts for security. We lived in constant fear. Simple things became complex: buying food, washing, clothes, explaining why we didn't attend church. Everything required a carefully constructed lie. How long did you do this? Mason asked. Nearly 5 months. Allied forces were moving too slowly. The original plan of returning to my unit became secondary to the immediate work of disrupting German operations. And you and Madeline were pretending to be married that whole time. Katie's question carried unspoken implications. Thad met her, gazed steadily. We were playing roles that became increasingly complicated. Remember, I had someone waiting for me back home. Grandma Eleanor, Zoe said. Thad nodded. My fiancé then. We'd been engaged just before I shipped out. The 3 teenagers exchanged glances, clearly trying to reconcile this information with the passionate tone of Madeline's letters. That's where the real story begins, Thad said quietly. Not with war or resistance operations, but with the impossible situation of having obligations to two worlds that could never meet. Wait, I'm confused, Mason said the next morning as they sat on the porch, watching a summer rain shower. If you were engaged to Grandma Eleanor, then how did you and Madeline ... He trailed off, uncomfortable with finishing the question. Thad studied his grandson's face. It's all right to ask. I wasn't perfect. War doesn't allow for perfect choices. He took out a faded photograph of a young woman with victory rolls in her hair, smiling brightly at the camera. This is Eleanor at 20. We'd known each other since high school. The grandchildren passed the photo between them, searching for resemblances to the grandmother they'd known. Eleanor wrote to me every week during training. Said she'd wait however long it took. I carried her picture through basic training, across the Atlantic, onto that beach. Thad's voice softened. I was fighting for a future with her. Did you write back? Katie asked. When I could, after I joined the resistance, it became impossible. No letters could be sent that might be intercepted, so she didn't know if you were alive. Zoe looked horrified. The army listed me as missing, in action. She later told me she never gave up hope. Thad produced a third letter, its edges worn from countless readings. This came 3 months into my time with the resistance. Madeline and I had successfully completed several operations. We'd narrowly escaped capture twice. Living in constant danger creates a closeness difficult to explain. Katie took the letter and read, My dearest T, tonight's moon reminds me of your stories of sailing on Chesapeake Bay. How strange that I can now picture your homeland through your eyes, places I've never seen but feel. I know through your words. The nightmares came again last night. I heard you calling out in your sleep. Whose name was it? Eleanor's, or someone lost on the beach you cannot speak of? There is no room for jealousy in war. We both know our time together has an end date written in invisible ink. Allied forces, advance. Someday soon you will return to your real life, and I to whatever remains of mine. Yet something in me has changed irreversibly. Perhaps it is selfish to write this. Forgive me that the dead apple tree bloomed today one single blossom against all reason. I choose to see it as a sign. Until tomorrow, silence hung over the porch as Katie carefully refolded the letter. She knew. About Eleanor, Mason finally said. Thad nodded. I never lied to her about that. Madeline understood I had commitments, a life waiting across the ocean, but you were falling in love with her anyway, Katie said. Not a question, but a statement. I fought against it, Thad admitted. Reminded myself daily of my promises to Eleanor. But when you face death every moment, the heart makes its own choices. He pulled out a small, worn photograph from his wallet, one the grandchildren had never seen. A serious-faced young woman in simple clothes, her hair pulled back, standing beside a stone wall. The only picture I have of her. A local resistance member had a camera rare. During occupation, took it for documentation purposes. Did you ever tell Grandma about her? Zoe asked quietly. Eventually, but that came much later, Thad said. First came the worst night of the war, the night that changed everything. That evening, after the grandchildren had helped prepare Denora, new development that didn't escape. Thad's noticed they gathered again in the living room, the scrapbook open on the coffee table. You said something about the worst night, Mason prompted. Thad nodded gravely. April 17th, 1944. A date burned into my memory. He described how their resistance cell had planned to sabotage a German ammunition depot. Everything was carefully orchestrated, the guard rotations memorized, the explosives prepared, the escape route planned. We'd received new members, 2 weeks earlier refugees from Paris, who claimed to have resistance connections. Madeline was suspicious, but the regional leader vouched for them. Katie leaned forward. They were informants. One was we never discovered which one. Thad's hand trembled slightly as he turned to a blank page in the scrapbook. No photographs exist of what happened next. Perhaps that's a mercy. He described how they were awakened at 3 a.m. by urgent knocking. Their radio operator, warning that the Gestapo was raiding safe houses throughout the region. We had 10 minutes. maybe less. Grabbed essential documents, weapons, destroyed the radio. Madeline had prepared for this possibility, had a hidden compartment beneath the chicken coop with emergency supplies. The raid came just as they slipped into the forest behind the farmhouse. German shepherds, flashlights, shouting. We spent 3 days hiding in an abandoned hunting cabin 5 miles from town. No food except what we'd grabbed. Couldn't risk a fire. April nights in Normandy are bitterly cold. Were you scared? Zoe asked. Terrified, Thad admitted. Not just of capture, but of what we'd learned. Half our network had been arrested. People who had become friends were being tortured for information that could lead to us. He produced the 4th letter, this one written on the back of a map. The handwriting hurried and uneven. Katie read, T, if you find this, I've gone to check the South Road. Don't follow one of us, must survive to warn the others. If I don't return by nightfall, use the compass to head northwest until you reach the coastal road. Allied sympathizers at the stone cottage with blue shutters will help you. These might be my final words to you. Strange how none of them would be what I rehearsed in my mind during peaceful moments. Simply know this. In another life, one without war and oceans between us, I would have followed you anywhere. What I feel for you has been the one pure thing. In all this darkness, yours in all possible worlds, she was willing to sacrifice herself for you, Katie said softly. For the mission, Thad corrected. For the cause, Madeline always put the resistance first. But she loved you, Zoe insisted. Thad was quiet for a moment. She came back at dusk, muddy and exhausted, but alive. When I showed her the letter I'd found, she was embarrassed, said she'd never meant for me to see such raw emotions. What did you say? Mason asked. I kissed her, Thad said simply, for the first time, with German patrols searching for us in the woods and the world falling apart. I kissed her. Mason pulled out his phone, not to check messages, but to take a photo of the letter. For the record, he explained, this is history. Thad studied his grandson with surprise. You're documenting this? Someone should, Mason replied. It matters. Something shifted in Thad's expression, softening a recognition. For the first time, he saw that the technology he'd resented might preserve what he feared would be lost. The next day, he continued, we faced an impossible choice. The next day, Thad took his grandchildren to the local diner for breakfast, rare outing for him these days. As they settled into a corner booth, he noticed how differently they interacted with him now. The usual distance had vanished, replaced by attentiveness, occasional protective gestures when he navigated the steps. You were going to tell us about an impossible choice, Katie reminded him after they'd ordered. Thad nodded, keeping his voice low. After the raid, we connected with other resistance survivors. A courier brought news that Allied forces were advancing faster than expected. The front lines had moved within 30 miles of our position, so you could rejoin your unit, Mason asked. That was the plan. My commanding officer had sent specific orders. Any American personnel behind enemy lines were to return immediately to assist with intelligence about German positions. But Madeline couldn't go with you, Katie guessed. She refused to leave France. Her brother was still in that labor camp. The resistance needed every fighter as the Germans grew more desperate and brutal in retreat. Thad stirred his coffee slowly. She had responsibilities I couldn't ask her to abandon. Their food arrived, and they ate in thoughtful silence before Thad continued. We had 3 days before I was expected at the rendezvous point. 3 days to decide what our attachment meant, whether it had been merely a product of circumstances or something that could survive peace. He produced the 5th letter, written on proper stationery, looted from a German officer's quarters. He explained with a small smile. Katie read aloud, keeping her voice hushed. My beloved T, the stars were different in America, you once told me. I find myself wondering if I might someday see them through your eyes. A foolish thought, perhaps. I make no claims on your future. Your Eleanor has endured long months of uncertainty, believing in your return. Such faith deserves honor, yet I find myself drafting impossible plans. When my brother is freed, when France is liberated, when this war releases its grip on all our tomorrows, might there be a place for me across the ocean, not to disrupt, but to begin anew. The resistance has contacts in New York. I could find work, learn proper English beyond what you've taught me. We need not decide everything now. Consider this not a demand, but a door left open. I shall understand completely if you choose not to walk through it, with hope despite everything. She wanted to come to America after the war, Zoe said, eyes wide. It seemed possible then, Thad replied. Everything seemed possible and impossible. Simultaneously, what did you decide? Mason asked. I told her I would return after delivering critical intelligence, that we would find a way forward together. Thad's expression darkened. I believed it then. The arrogance of youth thinking we could bend the world to our desires. What about Eleanor? Katie asked gently. Thad looked out the window at the small town's quiet street. I convinced myself I could somehow honor both commitments. That time would provide an answer that wouldn't destroy someone I cared for. That's not really a plan, Mason observed. No, Thad agreed. It wasn't, but it let me leave Madeline with hope while fulfilling my military duty. He sighed. The human heart is skilled at self-deception when faced with impossible choices. So, you rejoined your unit, Katie prompted. After a goodbye I've replayed in my mind for 78 years. That afternoon, a summer thunderstorm rolled in, confining them to the house. Thad found Mason in his study, examining the military maps framed on the wall. These are the actual invasion maps, Mason said, impressed. We studied D-Day last semester, but they never showed us these details. Most records were classified. For decades, Thad explained, some still are. Katie and Zoe joined him, and Thad decided the intimate setting of his study was appropriate for the next chapter of his story. Our parting wasn't dramatic, he began. No running through train stations or cinematic declarations. War doesn't allow for such theatrics. He described a small stone bridge where a resistance courier would guide him to Allied lines. Dawn breaking over the misty fields, the weight of his pack containing intelligence documents. We had 10 minutes alone before the courier arrived. 10 minutes to say everything and nothing. Thad opened a small wooden box on his desk and removed a tarnished silver locket on a thin chain. Madeline gave me this. It had belonged to her mother. Inside was a small photograph of her family before the war and a lock of her hair. He carefully opened the delicate clasp to show them. I gave her my dog tag strictly against regulations, but I didn't care anymore. Why your dog tags? Zoe asked. Identification. If something happened to her, if she made it to American lines, they would connect her to me. Thad closed the locket gently. Also, I think I wanted to leave part of myself with her. Something official that bound us together. He withdrew the 6th letter from the scrapbook, its paper lighter than the others. Almost translucent. Katie unfolded it carefully. My dearest T, the courier has agreed to deliver this to your commanding officer. I pray it reaches you. 3 weeks have passed since our goodbye at the bridge. German forces retreat through our village daily now. Liberation seems inevitable. Though they destroy everything in their path, I must tell you something I couldn't find courage for in our final moments. Perhaps I feared it would burden your decision. Or perhaps I wasn't yet certain. I am carrying your child. The doctor confirms I am approximately 2 months along. A miracle in these terrible times. I do not write this to obligate you, but you deserve to know, whatever comes, this child will be loved fiercely. The plans we discussed, my coming to America after the war now, carry new significance. Yet I make no demands. Your prior commitments weigh on you heavily, I know. I will wait for word from you until winter. After that, I must make arrangements for our child's future, with or without your involvement. Please understand this is not an ultimatum, but practicality. With all my heart, Madeline. The study fell completely silent. Even the thunder outside seemed momentarily hushed. You had a child with Madeline, Katie finally whispered. Thad nodded slowly. I received that letter 2 months after rejoining my unit. By then, I was involved in combat operations pushing toward Germany. No opportunity to respond, much less return to her village. You were going to be a father, Mason said, stunned, and engaged to Grandma Eleanor, Zoe added, the implications dawning on her young face. The impossible choice became even more impossible. Thad confirmed quietly. By the time I had a chance to send a message, everything had changed. That evening, Thad noticed his grandchildren huddled together in whispered conversation. Their phones remained largely untouched, a miracle he wouldn't have believed possible a week ago. After dinner, Katie approached him. We've been talking, Grandpa. This is a lot to process. Did you ever see Madeline again? Thad gestured for them to join him in the living room. That's the next chapter. The hardest one? He explained how his unit had advanced through France into Germany. Communications were chaotic. The resistance networks dissolved as France was liberated, their members dispersing or joining regular military units. I wrote dozens of letters, to the village, to resistance contacts, to the French provisional government. Most never reached their destinations. Those that did went unanswered. What about the baby? Zoe asked. That consumed my thoughts. I requested leave to search for Madeline, but the war was reaching its climax. No personal missions were authorized, regardless of circumstances. Thad described the painful months of waiting, fighting, and desperate attempts to get information about Madeline and their child. By the time Germany surrendered, I'd received no word. Eleanor's letters continued arriving, faithful, loving, planning our future. The guilt was overwhelming. He produced a seventh letter, its envelope bearing official French government stamps. This arrived 6 months after VE Day, forwarded through multiple military offices. Katie read, My dear Thaddeus, if this reaches you, know that I've exhausted every means to find you through proper channels. Military bureaucracy is as formidable an enemy as any we faced during occupation. Our village was heavily damaged during the German retreat. Many records were destroyed, many lives lost. I have relocated to Lyon, where my mother's sister has taken me in. The child our daughter was born in November. I named her Elise, after the Beethoven piece you played on that battered piano we found. She has your eyes. Precisely your eyes. I write now not to disrupt your life, but to release you from any obligation you might feel. Through resistance contacts, I've learned of your distinguished service, your medals, your imminent return to America. Your Eleanor has waited faithfully all this time. Some loves are not meant for peacetime, Thaddeus. What we shared existed in a world apart, under circumstances that transformed us both. To transplant it might destroy its perfect truth. Elise and I will build our life here in France. She will know her father was an American hero who helped liberate our country. That is legacy enough. If someday you wish to know her, write to the address below. Otherwise, go forward into your American life with my complete blessing. We are both young, we have survived. That itself is victory enough, with gratitude for everything you gave France. And me, Madeline Rousseau. Katie's voice broke on the final lines. Even Mason wiped at his eyes. A daughter, Zoe whispered. We have a French aunt. Thad's hands trembled as he took back the letter. Half-sister to your father, technically, though I never knew what became of her. You didn't write to the address? Mason asked incredulously. I did, immediately. But post-war France was chaos. Displaced persons everywhere. By the time my letter arrived, Madeline and Elise had moved. The aunt knew nothing of their whereabouts. But you kept searching, right? Katie pressed. I was discharged 2 months later. Returned to Virginia. Eleanor met me at the dock, wearing her best dress, holding a welcome home sign. Thad's voice grew distant. I stood there, looking at this woman who had waited years for me, planning our life together, and I knew I had to make a choice that would define everything that followed. The next morning, Thad found his grandchildren in the kitchen, making breakfast. Katie was frying eggs, Mason setting the table, and Zoe arranging fresh flowers they'd picked from the garden. What's all this? He asked, genuinely surprised. We thought you might be tired after all the storytelling, Katie explained. Thad smiled, touched by the gesture. Thank you. He sat at the table, watching them work together with unexpected competence. Your parents would be impressed. So what happened when you got back to America? Mason asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. With Grandma Eleanor, Thad waited until they were all seated before continuing. I tried to be the returning hero Eleanor deserved. For 2 weeks, I attended welcome home parties, church celebrations, family gatherings. I smiled in photographs for the local newspaper. I discussed job prospects with her father. He paused, stirring his coffee. But I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. The letters from Madeline burned in my footlocker. The knowledge of a daughter across the ocean haunted every quiet moment. Did you tell Grandma? Katie asked. On our third Sunday back, we walked to the lake where I'd proposed before shipping out. I had rehearsed excuses, gentle letdowns, ways to end our engagement without revealing the painful truth. Thad shook his head. Instead, I found myself telling her everything. Every detail about Madeline, the resistance, our daughter. I expected anger, tears, a broken engagement ring thrown into the lake. What did she do? Zoe leaned forward. She listened, completely still, eyes on the water. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought she might never speak to me again. Thad's voice softened. Then she asked to see Madeline's photograph. I showed her the one from my wallet. She studied it and said, "She looks brave." The grandchildren exchanged glances. Eleanor asked if I still loved Madeline. I said yes. She asked if I still loved her too. I said yes to that as well, which was the honest truth. Then she asked the hardest question. "What do you want to do, Thad?" "What did you say?" Mason asked. I told her I needed to find my daughter, that I couldn't build a life on an abandoned responsibility. Thad's eyes grew distant. Then Eleanor did something I never expected. She said, "Then we'll find her together." Katie's hand flew to her mouth. "Grandma offered to help you find your child with another woman. She said if she was going to be my wife, she needed to know she was chosen freely, not out of obligation. And if I had a daughter, then any future we built would need to include her somehow." "That's incredible," Mason said. Eleanor was extraordinary, Thad agreed. 3 months later, we sailed to France. The Red Cross helped us search records. In Paris, Lyon, Normandy, we visited the village, found it mostly rebuilt. The locals remembered Madeline, but hadn't heard from her since she left. "Did you find her?" Zoe asked quietly. Thad shook his head. Cold trail after cold trail. Post-war Europe was still in chaos. Millions displaced, records destroyed. After 6 weeks, our money ran out. We had to return home. "Without your daughter," Katie whispered. Eleanor and I were married that December. She suggested we keep searching by mail, through agencies. She wrote dozens of letters herself. Thad's eyes glistened. "That's the woman your grandmother was. Capable of a grace I'm still humbled by, all these years later." That afternoon, the grandchildren convinced Thad to show them old family albums, not the war scrapbook, but the decades that followed. Photos of a young Thad and Eleanor building their first home. Vacations to the mountains, holiday gatherings. "You both look happy," Katie observed, studying a beach photograph from the 1950s. "We were," Thad confirmed. "Eleanor made happiness possible when I didn't think I deserved it." Zoe pointed to a photo of Thad holding a baby. "Is that Dad?" Thad nodded. "Your father?" "Yes." "Wait," Mason said, flipping back through the album. "These photos jump from your wedding to Dad as a baby. That's like what, 15 years missing?" Thad closed the album gently. "Eleanor and I couldn't have children. We tried for 12 years. The revelation hung in the room as the grandchildren processed this new information. "So Dad was adopted?" Katie finally asked. "Yes, in 1958, Mason's." Brow furrowed. "But you never stopped looking for your daughter with Madeline right?" Thad sighed. "We continued searching, but methods were limited then. No internet, no DNA databases. International phone calls cost a fortune. Letters went unanswered. Eventually, practical concerns took precedence. Jobs, mortgages, building a life." "Did you tell Dad he was adopted?" Katie asked, "when he was 18? We explained everything, including about Elise. He was remarkably understanding." "Did he know why you couldn't have kids?" Zoe asked with characteristic directness. "Eleanor couldn't," Thad clarified quietly. "Complications from rheumatic fever as a child. We learned this after our second miscarriage. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. That's why she was so determined to help you find Elise, Katie said softly. She understood what it meant to lose a child. Thad nodded, eyes distant. Eleanor once told me that helping me search for Elise was healing for her too. That it helped her accept what she couldn't change about her own situation. Did she ever resent Madeline? Mason asked. Not that she ever expressed. Eleanor had an extraordinary capacity for empathy. She understood that war creates impossible situations. Thad smiled faintly. She used to say that Madeline preserved a part of me that might otherwise have been destroyed by war, and for that she was grateful. That's beautiful, Katie whispered. When we adopted your father, Eleanor suggested we name him Thomas after my father. Yes, but also because it began with the same letter as Thaddeus. She said perhaps, somewhere in France, Elise would recognize the connection if our paths ever crossed. Zoe wiped a tear. Did you ever tell Dad about his half-sister? Of course. He even helped with the search when he was in college. Used his spring break to visit France with university connections. Thad shook his head. By then, the trail was decades cold. So we have a French aunt who never knew about us, Mason said, and we never knew about her. Until now, Thad corrected gently. Now you know. The story isn't lost anymore. That evening, Thad noticed his grandchildren huddled around their devices, not the aimless scrolling he'd observed when they first arrived, but focused, intense research. Katie had her laptop open, while Mason and Zoe compared notes on their phones. What? Are you three plotting? He asked. They exchanged glances before Katie spoke. Grandpa, we think we might be able to find Elise or her children, our cousins. Thad lowered himself carefully into his armchair. I've hired private investigators, contacted international agencies. Even in the internet age, the trail went cold. But you didn't have us, Mason said with teenage confidence. Digital natives with unlimited data plans. Despite himself, Thad smiled. And what's your strategy? Katie turned her laptop to show him. I'm building a family tree on Ancestry.com, including everything we know about Madeline and Elise. I'm searching French public records, Mason added. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, death records all digitized now. And I'm checking social media, Zoe explained. Looking for anyone in France with the last name Rousseau who might fit the right age profile or mention an American father. Thad watched them work, these children he'd dismissed as technology addicted. Now, leveraging those same tools for something meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on him. What about DNA testing? Katie suggested. Companies like 23andMe and Ancestry have millions of users worldwide. If Elise or her children ever submitted DNA, you think I haven't tried? Thad shook his head. 5 different DNA companies over the past decade. No matches close enough to matter. But the databases grow every day, Mason pointed out. And French users might be newer to the platforms. Thad didn't want to discourage them, but he'd had his hopes raised and dashed too many times over the decades. Wait, Zoe suddenly said, staring at her phone. Grandpa, where exactly in Normandy was Madeline's village? Near St. Miraglise, small place called Raveneville. Zoe's fingers flew across her screen, and her full name was Madeline Rousseau. Any middle name? Madeline Clothilde Rousseau. Born April 3rd, 1922. Katie, look at this. Zoe passed her phone over. Katie's eyes widened. A French newspaper article from 1987. It mentions a commemoration ceremony for local resistance fighters. There's a quote from someone named Clothilde Bonnet, who says her mother, Madeline Rousseau, was part of the resistance near Raveneville. Thad's hands began to tremble. Clothilde Madeline's middle name, Mason said excitedly. She might have given it to another daughter, or Elise. Changed her name, Katie finished. The article says this Clothilde was speaking at a memorial for her mother, who had passed away in 1985. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Madeline had died nearly 40 years ago. I never knew, Thad whispered. All these years, Katie gently placed her hand over his. But Clothilde Bonnet might be Elise, your daughter, and Bonnet would be her married name. which explains why searches for Rousseau didn't find her. Can we find this clothed person? Thad asked, voice unsteady. Mason was already typing, working on it. French phone directories, social media, property records. I'll check for obituaries too, Katie said softly. She'd be in her late 70s now, if she's still alive. Thad sat back, overwhelmed. In one evening, these children with their screens and search engines had potentially uncovered what had eluded him for over 7 decades. Keep looking, he whispered. Please. The next morning, Thad found his grandchildren still researching, bleary-eyed but determined. Katie had fallen asleep on the couch with her laptop still open. Mason was cross-referencing French census records, while Zoe scrolled through social media profiles. Any progress? Thad asked, bringing them coffee. Maybe, Mason said cautiously. We found records of a clothed bonnet who taught history at Elysian Lion until 2010. Right age, right region, and we found her son on Facebook. Zoe added, François Bonnet lives in Paris. Works as an architect. My grandson, Thad whispered, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Potentially, Katie cautioned, waking up. We need more confirmation before getting too excited. Thad nodded, appreciating her prudence. I've had too many false leads over the years. He disappeared into his study, returning with the scrapbook. There's one more letter, he said quietly. The 8th. I've never read it. The grandchildren stared at him in disbelief. You've had another letter all this time. Mason asked. Thad carefully opened the scrapbook to the final page, where a sealed envelope was secured. It arrived in 1952. French postmark. No return address. I recognized Madeleine's handwriting immediately. Why didn't you open it? Katie asked gently. Eleanor and I were happy then. We'd made peace with the past, or so I thought. I was afraid. He paused. Afraid it might contain news that would reopen wounds that Elise was ill, or that Madeleine was struggling, or worse, that they were thriving without any need for me. Either possibility seemed unbearable. So you just kept it. 470. Years. Zoe's young face registered pure disbelief. I almost opened it dozens of times. After Eleanor died, especially, Thad's fingers trembled as they traced the envelope's edge. Eventually, it became a symbol of a door I'd chosen not to walk through. Perhaps that was cowardice. The room fell silent. Then Katie spoke softly. Would you like to read it now, Grandpa? Thad studied their faces, these children who had become unexpectedly precious to him in the past week. I think perhaps you should. Read it, he said, carefully detaching the envelope and handing it to Katie. All of you deserve to know the ending of this story as much as I do. Katie took the envelope reverently. The glue had long since dried, making it easy to open without tearing. She unfolded yellowed pages covered in elegant, flowing script. It's in French, she said. I can translate, Mason offered. 4 years of French class should be good for something. He began reading slowly, consulting his phone occasionally for words he didn't recognize. My dear Thaddeus, if this letter reaches you, know that it comes after much deliberation. 7 years have passed since my last communication, and circumstances compel me to write once more. I must share the most difficult news. Our beloved Elise died of pneumonia this winter, just before her 7th birthday. No parent should endure such loss, yet here I find myself, alone with grief no words can capture. I have kept all your letters, though you never found us. Your persistence speaks to the man I knew you to be. Perhaps it is fate's cruelty that this letter may finally connect us, only to share such sorrow. I am moving to Lyon permanently. My sister's health fails, and she needs my care. Should you wish to write, the address is enclosed. With enduring memory, Madeleine. Tears streamed down Thad's face. His daughter, a child he'd never known, had been dead for 78 years. All his searching had been for a ghost. Oh, Grandpa, Katie whispered, moving to kneel beside his chair. I never knew, he said, voice breaking. All this time, ... Then, Mason, still reading the letter, suddenly straightened. Wait, there's a postscript. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he continued translating the postscript. P.S. Clothed. My sister's daughter, whom I've raised since birth, asks about her. American uncle, constantly. She is 8 now, precocious and brave. Though not of your blood, she has grown up with stories of the lieutenant who helped save France. If someday you wish to know her, she would welcome it. Perhaps she is the daughter of my heart, if not my body. The room fell completely silent. Thad stared at Mason, uncomprehending. Clothed, wasn't Elise, Katie finally said. She was Madeline's niece, but the newspaper article said she was speaking about her mother. Zoe objected. Madeline raised her, Mason explained. She probably considered Madeline her mother. Thad closed his eyes, processing this revelation. So the clothed bonnet you found, could be Madeline's niece, who she raised after Elise died, Katie finished. Not your biological daughter, but someone who knew about you. And Francois would be her son, not your grandson, Mason added gently. Thad sat silently for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled faintly. Madeline found a way to be a mother, after all. Not to our child, but to our sisters. There's something beautiful in that. Should we still try to contact this Francois person? Zoe asked uncertainly. Yes, Thad said with sudden decisiveness. He may not be my blood, but he's part of Madeline's family. That matters. Katie squeezed his hand. We'll help you draft an email. Careful, respectful, explaining everything. No, Thad shook his head. Numbers. More letters that might go unanswered. If technology has taught me anything this week, it's that some barriers can be overcome. He pointed to Zoe's tablet. Show me how to do one of those video calls. 2 hours later, after carefully composing a message through Francois Bonnet's professional website and receiving an astonished reply, Thad sat in his armchair, facing a laptop screen. His grandchildren hovered nervously behind him as the video call connected. The face that appeared was that of a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and startlingly familiar eyes, and not Thad's eyes, but something in their intensity reminded him of Madeline, Monsieur Mercer. The French accent was thick, but the English clear. Yes, thank you for speaking with me, Monsieur Bonnet. This is quite extraordinary. When I received your message, Francois shook his head in disbelief. I grew up hearing stories about an American lieutenant named Thaddeus. My grandmother, well, my great-aunt Madeline, who raised my mother, she spoke of you often. She did. Thad couldn't keep the emotion from his voice. Of course, you were the hero of many bedtime stories. Francois smiled. The brave American who helped the resistance, who protected grandmother during the occupation. I tried to find her after the war, Thad explained. For many years, she knew, Francois said softly. She kept your letters in a special box. My mother Clotilde showed them to me when I was old enough to understand. Did Madeline ... was she happy? Thad asked, the question he'd wondered for decades. She had a good life, taught school in Lyon, never married, but was surrounded by family, my mother, then me and my sister. She spoke of you with fondness, never bitterness. Thad nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. I have photographs, Francois offered, of grandmother, of my mother Clotilde, even one of little Elise before she passed. I could send them to you, if you'd like. I would like that very much, Thad managed. The next day brought a flurry of emails from Francois photographs. Scanned documents, family stories that had been passed down through generations. Thad and his grandchildren gathered around the kitchen table, examining each digital treasure as it arrived. This is Madeline in 1960, Thad said, enlarging a photograph on Katie's laptop. The woman's face was lined, but still recognizable, her eyes holding the same determined expression he remembered. She's beautiful, Zoe said. I can see why you fell in love with her. Another photo showed a young Clotilde in her graduation gown, beaming beside a proud Madeline. She raised her sister's daughter as her own, Katie observed. After losing Elise, and look at this, Mason pointed to a scanned letter. It's from Grandma Eleanor. Thad stared in disbelief at his late wife's handwriting. I don't understand. The letter, dated 1956, was addressed to Madeline. Dear Mademoiselle Rousseau, I hope this letter finds you well. You don't know me, but we share a connection through my husband, Thaddeus Mercer. Thad has searched for you and Elise for years without success. He doesn't know I'm writing to you perhaps. This is an overreach on my part. If so, I apologize sincerely. I've obtained your address through the International Red Cross, where records show you inquired about Thad's status after the war. He speaks of you with such respect and care. Your daughter's absence in his life remains an open wound that time hasn't healed. If there's any way we might establish communication, even if only to provide him with news of Elise's well-being, it would mean everything. I harbor no resentment toward you. War creates impossible situations, and from everything Thad has told me, you showed extraordinary courage and heart during the darkest of times. Respectfully yours. Eleanor, Mercer Grandma, found Madeline's address. Mason looked stunned and reached out to her directly, Katie added, without telling you. Another email arrived from Francois with more scanned correspondence. Madeline's reply to Eleanor explained about Elise's death and her reluctance to cause Thad more pain with the news. Subsequent letters, dozens exchanged over decades, showed a remarkable friendship developing between the two women. They wrote to each other for years, Thad whispered, reading the exchanges. Eleanor knew about Elise's death, about Clothold, about Madeline's life in Lyon. Why didn't she tell you? Zoe asked Katie, reading ahead, found the answer in a letter from 1962. Dearest Madeline, thank you for the photographs of Clothold's first communion. She grows more lovely each year. You ask why I haven't told Thad about our correspondence. The truth is complex. When I first wrote to you, I intended to share everything. But upon learning of Elise's passing, I couldn't bear to deliver such devastating news. Thad had just begun to find peace. We were in the process of adopting our son, and reopening that wound seemed cruel. As years passed, the right moment never presented itself. Now, I fear he might feel betrayed by our friendship, seeing it as a secret kept rather than a bridge built. Perhaps someday circumstances will align to make the truth possible. Until then, know that your stories and photographs help me ensure that part of Thad's history and Elise's memory remains preserved. Even if silently. Your friend across the ocean, Eleanor. Thad wiped tears from his eyes. She was protecting me all those years, and keeping a connection to Madeline's family, Mason added. For you, even if you didn't know it. Francois' next email contained the most stunning revelation. Clothold had visited America in 1972, staying with Eleanor while Thad was on a business trip. Eleanor had arranged everything, allowing Madeline's niece to see the country her Uncle Thaddeus called home. They met, Thad said in disbelief. Eleanor and Clothold actually met. Grandma created a bridge between the families, Katie said softly, even if you couldn't cross it yet. 3 weeks later, Thad stood in Charles de Gaulle Airport, leaning on his cane as travelers rushed past. Katie held his arm protectively, while Mason managed their luggage, and Zoe scanned the crowd. There, Zoe pointed excitedly. That must be Francois. The silver-haired man they'd spoken with by video approached, accompanied by a woman in her 30s and 2 children. Francois embraced Thad with unexpected emotion. Lieutenant Mercer, he said, his voice thick. Welcome to France. Thank you for arranging everything, Thad replied, still amazed that his grandchildren had orchestrated this journey. Their parents had been stunned by the story, but immediately supportive, handling the necessary arrangements for a 97-year-old to travel internationally. Francois introduced his daughter, Sophie, and her children. Thad's connection to Madeline now extending to a 4th generation. Though not blood relations, the bonds felt undeniably real. The following days passed in a blur of emotion. Francois had planned everything meticulously, balancing Thad's limited stamina with meaningful visits. They toured Lyon, where Madeline had spent most of her life teaching. They visited the small apartment where she'd raised Clothold, now a boutique, but with the original facade preserved. Mother said grandmother spoke of you often, Francois explained as they sat in a cafe, overlooking the rain, always fondly, never with regret. She kept your dog tags until the day she died. Thad nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Sophie, who spoke excellent English, shared family stories that had been passed down, how Madeline had begun a small library for neighborhood children after the war. how she'd corresponded regularly with Eleanor, exchanging recipes and parenting advice. They became true friends, Sophie explained. Grandmere, Clothold visited your wife 3 times over the years. Always when you were away on business. Eleanor's careful arrangement. I never suspected, Thad admitted. Eleanor never gave any indication. She promised Madeline not to disrupt your peace, Francois said. Both women agreed that some wartime wounds were better left undisturbed. On the 4th day, they drove to Normandy. The village near Ravenelville had been rebuilt after the war, bearing little resemblance to the place Thad remembered. Yet as they approached the small stone bridge where he and Madeline had said goodbye 78 years earlier, something in him recognized it instantly. This is where we parted, he said quietly to Katie, who hadn't left his side throughout the journey. Francois led them to the village cemetery, where a simple headstone marked Madeline's final resting place. Beside it, a smaller stone for Elise. Thad stood before them, supported by his grandchildren, while Francois respectfully stepped back to give them privacy. Hello, Madeline, Thad whispered. I'm sorry it took so long. Katie placed a bouquet they'd brought on the grave, then helped Thad lower himself to one knee with difficulty. From his pocket, he withdrew the tarnished silver locket he'd carried since 1944. I kept this safe, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I might return it someday. He placed it gently on the headstone, his hand lingering on the cool marble. And hello, Elise, he continued, turning to the smaller grave. I wish I could have known you, but I'm meeting your family now, and they're wonderful. When Thad finally stood, he found not only his grandchildren waiting, but Francois and his family as well. 3 generations connected by war, separated by oceans, yet somehow finding each other across time. They're part of our family now, Zoe declared with characteristic directness. Francois smiled and nodded. Yes, different branches of the same tree. 1 month after returning from France, Thad sat in his living room, surrounded by family. His son Thomas and daughter-in-law had arrived for Sunday dinner, joined by Francois and Sophie, who had flown in for a week-long visit to America. The grandchildren moved easily between the adults, serving coffee and translating French phrases when needed. We have something for you, Grandpa, Katie announced, placing a wrapped package in his lap. All of us worked on it, Mason added. Even the French cousins helped, Zoe said, grinning at Sophie's children, who beamed with pride. Thad carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a sleek, leather-bound book. Unlike his weathered wartime scrapbook, this one was modern, its cover embossed, with a simple title, The Complete Story. Open it, Katie encouraged. Inside, Thad found a stunning digital creation printed on archival paper. The first pages contained scanned versions of all 8 letters from Madeline, carefully preserved with professional quality reproductions. His wartime photographs followed, now restored and labeled with locations and dates that his grandchildren had meticulously researched. But it was the subsequent sections that brought tears to his eyes. Photos of Madeline's life after the war that Francois had shared. Images of Clothold growing up. Eleanor's letters to Madeline revealing their secret friendship. Francois as a young architect, Sophie as a child. The parallel lives of 2 families, separated by an ocean but connected by history. The final pages showed their recent trip to France, Thad, with his grandchildren at Madeline's grave, standing on the stone bridge, meeting Francois for the first time. The book concluded with a group photograph taken just days ago of them together on Thad's front porch, the American and French branches of an unexpected family tree united at last. We made digital copies for everyone, Mason explained. Each family will have the complete record, but we wanted you to have a physical version, Katie added, something you can hold. Like your original scrapbook, Zoe said. But continuing the story, Thad ran his hand over the pages, amazed at how technology, which he'd so often dismissed, had preserved and expanded his most precious memories. Thank you, he whispered. I never imagined the story could have an ending like this. Later that evening, as the younger children prepared for bed, Thad overheard Francois' grandson asking Zoe about the ancient scrapbook that had started everything. It's not ancient, Zoe corrected. It's history. Real history. And now we're part of it. Thomas approached his father, coffee in hand. "Dad, I never knew the full story. Not like this. I should have shared it sooner," Thad admitted, but finding the right words, ... "Some stories need time," Thomas said, echoing Thad's own words from weeks earlier. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Thad sat alone, with both scrapbooks open before him. The old and the new, the past preserved and the future connected. He touched the faded ink of Madeline's first letter, then turned to the new book's final page where his grandchildren had written a dedication for Commander Thaddeus Mercer, who taught us that the most important stories aren't found on screens, but in the lives of those who came before us. And for Eleanor, whose quiet grace built bridges we're only now discovering. Some love stories span continents, generations, and even different families, weaving together threads that create something beautiful and unexpected. We are all part of this tapestry. Thad closed the books gently. Outside his window, the stars shone over Virginia, the same stars that had watched over a farmhouse in Normandy all those years ago. Different from the French stars Thad had once told Madeline, yet somehow, despite everything, those distant points of light had guided her, family and his together again. Some stories, it seemed, were determined to find their way home, no matter how many years it took.